The silver chains burned. Nova gritted her teeth against the searing pain, her wrists raw and bleeding where the metal touched her pale skin. The dungeon beneath the Blackmore pack house reeked of mold and old blood, a smell she'd become intimately familiar with over the past 3 days. Water dripped somewhere in the darkness, each drop counting down the hours until her execution. Cursed Omega, they'd called her, moon-touched freak. She couldn't blame them, really. Her midnight black hair had turned pure silver on her 16th birthday, the same night her wolf emerged, not gray or brown or any normal color, but white as moonlight with eyes that glowed an eerie violet. The pack elders had declared her an abomination, a sign of the moon goddess's displeasure. Her own parents had handed her over to the Alpha without a single tear, their faces blank with fear as they watched her being dragged away. That was 8 years ago. 8 years of wandering, of being passed from pack to pack like an unwanted possession, traded like livestock, used for her healing abilities until the wolves around her grew too frightened of her strange appearance and stranger powers. She'd saved countless lives during those years, mended broken bones, cured illnesses, pulled wolves back from the brink of death. And every single time, the gratitude eventually turned to suspicion. The warmth turned to whispers. The welcome turned to exile. The Blackmore pack had lasted longer than most. Nearly 2 years. Alpha Marcus had valued her gift enough to overlook her appearance, assigning her to the pack hospital where she'd saved dozens of lives. She'd started to hope, started to believe she might finally have found a place to belong. Then his son happened. Derek Marcus had cornered her in the supply closet 3 nights ago, his hands grabbing at her clothes, his breath hot and rancid with alcohol. She'd told him no. She'd pushed him away. But Derek was an Alpha's heir, and Alpha's heirs didn't accept rejection from worthless Omega freaks. So she'd defended herself the only way she knew how, with the gift that lived in her bones. She'd stopped his heart for exactly 3 seconds. Long enough for him to collapse, his eyes rolling back in his head. Long enough for the guards to find them, drawn by the crash of his body hitting the shelves. Long enough for the Alpha to sentence her to death for attacking his precious heir. No one cared that Derek had torn her clothes and left purple bruises blooming across her arms. No one asked why her lip was split or why she was crying. No one ever cared about the moon touched. She'd heard the Alpha's verdict from her cell, delivered in a bored tone like he was ordering breakfast, rather than condemning a woman to death. The Omega attacked my son without provocation. She'll be executed at dawn in 3 days. Let it serve as a reminder that freaks have no place in my pack. 3 days. 3 days of waiting in the dark, of replaying every mistake that had led her here, of wondering if this was how it was always meant to end. Alone, unmourned, forgotten. Part of her was almost relieved. At least it would finally be over. The dungeon door scraped open, grinding against stone that hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Nova didn't bother looking up. Another guard come to spit on her, probably. Or maybe the Alpha himself, come to gloat before tomorrow's execution. She'd learned long ago that dignity was a luxury the powerless couldn't afford, but she refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her cower. Well, well, the voice was deep, amused, and completely unfamiliar. When my scouts told me Blackmore was hiding a moon-touched healer in their dungeons, I thought they were lying. Nova raised her head slowly. The man standing in the doorway was tall, easily 6.5 feet, with shoulders broad enough to fill the entire frame. His hair was dark as midnight, streaked with silver at the temples despite a face that looked no older than 30. He wore black from head to toe, simple but clearly expensive, the kind of clothes that spoke of power rather than wealth. But it was his eyes that made her breath catch in her throat. They were gold, pure, molten gold, with vertical pupils that marked him as something more than an ordinary wolf. Alpha King. The thought slammed through her like lightning, making her heart stutter and her wolf surge against her consciousness despite the silver poisoning. There was only one wolf alive with eyes like that. Cale Ironwood, the Alpha King of the Northern Territories, ruler of 12 packs and the most powerful shifter on the continent. She'd heard stories about him since childhood, tales of his strength, his justice, his terrifying temper when provoked. Some said he'd challenged and killed 30 alphas to unite the Northern packs. Others claimed he could shift faster than thought and run for days without rest. Looking at him now, Nova believed every word. "Your Majesty," her voice came out as a croak, her throat raw from thirst. She hadn't had water in 2 days. "I wasn't aware Blackmore had such distinguished visitors." Something flickered in those golden eyes. Surprise, maybe, or interest. He stepped further into the dungeon, his boots echoing on the damp stone floor, and torchlight caught the angles of his face, sharp cheekbones, a strong jaw, a faint scar running along one side that only added to his dangerous beauty. Most prisoners in your position would be begging for mercy right about now. Would begging change anything? No. He stepped closer still, and Nova caught his scent, pine and winter storms, and something wild that made her wolf whine inside her chest. The beast had been silent for days, beaten down by the silver, but now she stirred, pressing against Nova's consciousness with an urgency that made no sense. But it would be entertaining. "Then I'm sorry to disappoint you." The Alpha King crouched down in front of her, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his irises, the faint lines at the corners of his eyes. Close enough that his scent wrapped around her like a blanket. He studied her face with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "What's your name?" Little Moon touched. Nova Ashworth." Nova." He rolled the name across his tongue like he was tasting it. "And what did you do to earn execution, Nova Ashworth? I've heard several versions from the Blackmore wolves, but I find myself curious about yours." "I stopped the Alpha's son's heart for 3 seconds when he tried to rape me." The words hung in the air between them, stark and ugly. Cale's expression didn't change, but his scent shifted, something darker bleeding through the pine and storms. Something that smelled like barely controlled rage. "Did you now?" It wasn't a question. He reached out slowly, giving her time to flinch away, and his fingers brushed her chin. His touch was surprisingly gentle as he tilted her face toward the torchlight. "Those bruises on your arms, his work." "Among other things." "And the Blackmore Alpha sentenced you to death for defending yourself." Nova laughed, the sound bitter and broken, echoing off the damp stone walls. "My kind doesn't get to defend ourselves, Your Majesty. Surely you know that. Moon-touched Omegas are useful until we're not, and then we're monsters. Demons. Curses that need to be eliminated before we corrupt the pack." "That's what they told you." Something dangerous moved behind his golden eyes. "That's what they've always told me. Since I was 16 years old and my hair turned silver overnight. Since my wolf emerged white instead of brown. Since I discovered I could feel the life force of every living thing around me and learned to manipulate it." She met his gaze squarely, too tired for fear. "I am what I am, Your Majesty. I've made peace with it." The Alpha King stood abruptly, his movements sharp with barely contained energy. For a long moment, he said nothing, just stared down at her with those impossible golden eyes. Nova could feel something building in the air between them, tension, electricity, the promise of violence or salvation. Then he turned to the door. "Bring me the keys." The guard who'd been hovering in the hallway stumbled forward, a middle-aged wolf with a face like curdled milk. He fumbled with a ring of iron keys, his hands shaking. "Why, Your Majesty, I can't," the Alpha ordered. The Alpha ordered the execution of a woman for defending herself against sexual assault. Cale's voice went cold enough to freeze the air, and Nova saw the guard flinch as if struck. "I'm countermanding that order. This woman is now under my protection." "But the Alpha will." The Alpha will answer to me if he has complaints. Kale turned, and the full weight of his power pressed down on the dungeon. Nova felt it even through the silver poisoning, the crushing dominance of an Alpha king in his prime. Would you like to argue with me? The guard went pale as old bone and dropped the keys at Kale's feet. Nova watched in stunned silence as the Alpha king himself unlocked her chains. His fingers worked the mechanisms with practiced efficiency, and she wondered briefly how many dungeons he'd seen, how many prisoners he'd freed or condemned. The moment the silver fell away, she gasped. Her healing gift flooded through her body like water through a broken dam, mending the burns on her wrists, knitting together the raw flesh where the chains had bitten deep. Color rushed back to her pale skin. The constant agony she'd learned to ignore faded to nothing, replaced by a tingling warmth that spread through every limb. "Can you walk?" Kale asked, his voice softer now. Yes, I think so." She braced her hands against the wall and tried to stand. Her legs buckled immediately, 3 days without food or water taking their toll. She would have hit the cold stone floor if strong arms hadn't caught her. The Alpha King lifted her like she weighed nothing, cradling her against the broad expanse of his chest. His scent wrapped around her, pine and storms, and that wild, indefinable something, and her wolf practically purred with contentment. "Mine," the beast whispered. "Ours." Nova shoved the thought away. She was delirious. Dying, probably, hallucinating from dehydration and silver poisoning. "What are you doing?" she demanded, too shocked to filter her words. "Taking you out of here." "Why?" Those golden eyes met hers, and something passed between them, something electric and terrifying and impossible. Nova's heart stuttered, then raced, and she couldn't tell if it was fear or something else entirely. "Because you're mine," Kale said simply, "and I protect what's mine." Nova's world went dark. She woke in a bed softer than clouds, surrounded by silk sheets that smelled of lavender and something fresh and green. Sunlight streamed through enormous windows, casting patterns across a ceiling painted with silver stars and crescent moons. For one confused moment, she thought she was dead, that this was whatever afterlife the moon goddess granted to her cursed children. Then memory crashed back. The dungeon, the Alpha King, those impossible words. "You're mine." Nova sat up too fast and immediately regretted it. Her head spun like a top, and her stomach cramped with hunger so intense it nearly doubled her over. "Easy," a woman's voice, gentle and warm. "You've been unconscious for almost a full day. Your body needs time to recover, even with your healing gift working overtime." Nova blinked until the room came into focus. A young woman sat beside the bed, pretty, with auburn hair that fell in soft waves and kind green eyes that crinkled at the corners when she smiled. She wore the simple dress of a pack healer, and her scent marked her as a beta. Non-threatening. Friendly. "Where am I?" The Ironwood Palace, King Kale's personal residence in the Northern Territories. The woman's smile widened. "I'm Myra, by the way. His Majesty asked me to watch over you while you recovered. He said you might be disoriented when you woke." Disoriented is one word for it. Nova pressed a hand to her forehead, trying to make sense of the jumbled pieces of her memory. "Why did he bring me here? I don't understand. I'm nobody, just a cursed Omega from a pack that wanted me dead." Myra's smile turned knowing, her eyes sparkling with something that looked suspiciously like excitement. "He hasn't told you yet, has he?" "Told me what?" Before Myra could answer, the door opened with a soft click. Kale strode in, still dressed in the dark clothes he'd worn in the dungeon, his presence filling the room like a physical force. Power radiated from him in waves, not threatening, but impossible to ignore, like standing too close to a bonfire. "Leave us," he said to Myra, not unkind but absolute, the voice of a king who expected obedience. Myra bowed her head and slipped out, casting one last meaningful glance at Nova before the door closed behind her. Nova pulled the sheets higher, suddenly aware that she was wearing nothing but a thin nightgown. The silk whispered against her skin, and she wondered who had changed her clothes, who had cleaned the blood and dungeon filth from her body. "Your Majesty." Kale. He crossed to the window, his back to her, and stood silhouetted against the afternoon light. "We're past formalities, don't you think?" "I don't know what we're past. I don't even know why I'm here." He was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, almost uncertain. A strange sound from a man who ruled 12 packs. "You're here because you're my mate." The words hit her like a physical blow, driving the breath from her lungs. Nova stared at his back, her mind refusing to process what he'd said. "That's impossible." "Is it?" He turned to face her, and the intensity in his golden eyes stole what little air she had left. "When I walked into that dungeon, the bond hit me so hard I nearly shifted on the spot. My wolf was screaming at me, clawing to get to you. You didn't feel it." Nova thought back to that moment. The lightning strike sensation when their eyes met, the way her wolf had stirred despite the silver poisoning, the strange certainty that had flooded through her body like warmth spreading through frozen limbs. "I thought I was dying," she whispered. "I thought it was the silver poisoning finally killing me." "It wasn't." Kale moved closer, stopping at the edge of the bed. This close, she could see the fine lines of tension around his eyes, the rigid set of his shoulders. He was nervous, she realized with shock. The Alpha King was nervous. "You're a moon-touched healer with the rarest gift in our history, and you're my fated mate. The moon goddess paired us for a reason." "The moon goddess abandoned me the night I turned 16. Nova's voice cracked, old pain bleeding through despite her best efforts to contain it. "She cursed me with this appearance, these powers, this life. Why would she give me a mate? Why would she give me you?" "I don't know." Kale sat down on the edge of the bed, close enough to touch but not quite touching. His scent washed over her, familiar now, comforting in a way that terrified her. "But I've learned not to question fate. I spent years searching for my mate, convinced I'd never find her. I watched other alphas find their pairs, build their families while I remained alone. I'd almost given up." He paused, his jaw tightening. "And then my scouts brought word of a moon-touched healer being held in the Blackmore dungeons, and something told me I needed to go myself, to see with my own eyes." "And if I don't want this?" Nova asked quietly, forcing the words past the lump in her throat. "If I reject the bond?" Something like pain flickered across Kale's face, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. "Then I'll take you wherever you want to go and ensure you're protected for the rest of your life. The bond doesn't give me ownership of you, Nova. It's a gift, not a chain. You have a choice." Nova stared at him, this impossible man who'd walked into her prison and offered her freedom in the same breath he'd claimed her as his. "I've never had choices before," she said finally, the truth of it bitter on her tongue. "Every decision has been made for me. What pack I belong to, what work I do, who touches me, when I die." Then it's time that changed. Nova felt something crack inside her, some wall she'd built so long ago she'd forgotten it existed. Tears pricked at her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She didn't cry. Crying was a weakness she couldn't afford. "Why do you care?" The question came out rougher than she intended. "You don't know me. You found me in a dungeon, beaten and starving and sentenced to die. Why would anyone?" "Because my wolf recognized you the moment I saw you." Kale's voice was steady, certain. "Because something in me knew you were worth saving long before I understood why. Because you're the strongest person I've ever met, and I've met a lot of people." He paused, a hint of a smile crossing his face. "Also, you talked back to an Alpha King while chained to a wall. That takes either incredible bravery or incredible stupidity, and I'm choosing to believe the former." Despite everything, Nova felt her lips twitch. "Maybe it's both." "Maybe it is," Either way, you've got my attention, and my protection the rest. He spread his hands. The rest is up to you. A knock at the door interrupted whatever Nova might have said next. Kale's expression shifted, concern replacing the vulnerability she'd glimpsed. Enter. A guard stepped in, his face grim beneath a helm marked with the ironwood crest. Your Majesty, forgive the interruption, but there's news from the Silver Crest pack. Kale stood, his whole body going tense as a bowstring. What kind of news? The rogues hit them this morning at dawn. 50 wolves, maybe more. They tore through the eastern border before anyone could mount a defense. The guard's voice was steady, but Nova could smell his fear, sharp and acrid beneath his professional calm. They've taken prisoners, including Alpha Thornton's daughter and several pups. Nova watched the color drain from Kale's face. How many pups? 7, Your Majesty. The youngest is barely 2. Kale's hands clenched into fists, his knuckles going white. Assemble my war council. I want every available warrior ready to move within the hour. Send word to the Silver Crest survivors, we're coming. The guard bowed and left. Kale turned to Nova, and she saw the conflict in his eyes, the pull between his duty to his people and his newly discovered mate. Go, Nova said before he could speak. Those pups need you more than I do right now. I'll leave guards. Myra will stay with you, if you need anything. I survived 8 years alone. Nova managed a small smile. I can handle a few hours. Something shifted in Kale's expression. Respect, maybe, or gratitude. He crossed the room in 2 strides and caught her face in his hands, his touch impossibly gentle despite the strength she could feel coiled in his muscles. I will come back for you, he said fiercely. I will always come back. Then he was gone, and Nova was left alone with the ghost of his warmth on her skin and a bond singing in her chest that she didn't know how to silence. 3 hours passed. Nova paced the luxurious room like a caged animal, her mind churning with thoughts she couldn't quiet. Pups, 7 of them, including a 2-year-old, taken by rogues who would use them as leverage, as hostages, as prey. She'd seen what rogues did to captives during her years of wandering. She'd treated the survivors, the ones lucky enough to escape, the ones broken in body and spirit. She'd buried the ones who didn't survive. The decision crystallized slowly, taking shape like ice forming on a winter pond. By the time she found Myra in the hallway outside her room, speaking quietly with one of the guards, Nova's resolve was iron-hard. Both fell silent when they saw her. The rogues who took those pups, Nova said without preamble. Do they know about my healing gift? Myra exchanged a glance with the guard. Word has spread about the moon-touched healer in Blackmore. It's possible, likely even. Healers are always valuable to rogues. They can't maintain pack healers of their own, so they steal them. Then they'll want me, especially one who can do what I can. What are you suggesting? The guard's voice was wary, his hand drifting toward the sword at his hip. I'm suggesting that I go with the rescue party, not as a fighter, as bait. Nova kept her voice calm, reasonable, even as her heart hammered against her ribs. If the rogues think they can capture me, they'll lower their guard. They'll focus on me instead of defending their position, and once I'm close enough. You could stop their hearts, Myra breathed, her green eyes wide. Like you did to the Alpha's son. For more than 3 seconds if I have to. Nova met the guard's eyes squarely. Those are pups, children. I will not sit here in comfort while they're in danger if there's something I can do to help. The guard shook his head, his expression pained. The king would have my head if I let you anywhere near that fight. Literally, he'd rip it clean off my shoulders. Then take me to him and let him decide. 20 minutes later, Nova stood in a makeshift war camp at the edge of the Silver Crest territory. Warriors in wolf form surrounded her, their eyes curious, some hostile. She was a stranger, an Omega, a moon-touched freak inserting herself into their business. Kale stared at her with a mixture of fury and something that might have been reluctant admiration. Absolutely not. You don't own me, Nova reminded him, holding his golden gaze without flinching. You said so yourself. The bond is a gift, not a chain. This isn't about the bond. This is about keeping you alive. Those pups deserve someone willing to die for them. Nova stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. I've spent my whole life being useful to people who didn't care if I lived or died. For once, I want to be useful for something that matters. Something worth the cost. Please, let me help. Kale was silent for a long moment. Around them, warriors in wolf form paced and snarled, eager for battle. The scent of blood and fear drifted from the direction of the rogue camp, carried on a cold evening wind. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and red, like fire, like war. If anything happens to you, then at least I'll die for something worth dying for. Something broke behind those golden eyes. Before Nova could react, Kale pulled her against him, one hand tangled in her silver hair, and kissed her. It was fire and lightning, and the howl of wolves at the full moon. The mate bond blazed between them like a living thing, no longer tentative but consuming, and Nova felt tears slide down her cheeks without knowing why. His lips were warm and demanding, and she kissed him back with everything she had, all the fear and hope and desperate longing she'd never let herself feel. Come back to me, Kale growled against her lips. That's an order from your alpha. I'll try my best. The rogue camp was hidden in a ravine, protected by steep walls and guards at every entrance. Scouts had reported roughly 40 wolves still present, many of them battle-hardened fighters who'd survived years of brutal existence outside pack law. But they weren't expecting a single Omega to walk straight toward them, her silver hair gleaming in the dying light, her hands raised in surrender. I'm the healer from Blackmore, Nova called out, letting her voice carry across the rocky terrain. The one you've been looking for. I'll come willingly if you release the pups. For a moment, nothing happened. The wind whistled through the ravine, carrying the scent of unwashed bodies and old blood. Then a massive wolf emerged from the camp, scarred, one-eyed, his fur matted with old blood that had never been cleaned. He shifted to human form, revealing a man whose cruelty was written in every line of his weathered face. His smile showed too many teeth, yellowed and sharp. The moon-touched freak herself. He circled her slowly, his one eye gleaming with greed. I was hoping you'd hear about our little acquisition. Those pups are valuable, sure, good leverage against the packs that birthed them. But you're worth 10 times their weight in gold. 20, maybe. There are alphas who'd pay fortunes for a healer who can do what you can. Then let them go. You don't need them if you have me. The rogue leader laughed, a harsh sound like breaking bones. Let them go. Why would I do that when I can have both? He gestured, and 3 wolves lunged at Nova from the shadows. She was ready. Nova dropped to her knees, pressed her palms flat against the cold earth, and pushed her gift outward, not into a single target but into every living thing within 50 feet. Not to stop hearts, not to kill. To heal. The rogues stumbled, their attacks faltering. The wolves who'd been charging at her slowed, their aggression fading like morning mist as she flooded them with calm, with peace, with the bone-deep satisfaction of old wounds mending and chronic pain easing. She pushed harder, deeper, touching the damaged places in their minds. The trauma, the rage, the desperate loneliness that drove wolves to go rogue in the first place. This was the gift the moon goddess had truly given her. Not just the power to heal bodies, but the power to heal souls. What are you doing? The rogue leader staggered, his one eye going wide with confusion. What is this? This is what I really am. Nova rose to her feet, her silver hair whipping in a wind that came from nowhere, her violet eyes blazing with power she'd spent years hiding. Not a weapon, not a curse, a healer. Behind the rogues, Kale's warriors poured over the ravine walls like a dark tide. The battle was brief and brutal. The rogues, disoriented by Nova's healing pulse, their minds clouded with emotions they'd forgotten how to feel, fell quickly. Some surrendered, dropping to their bellies in submission. Others fought, but their hearts weren't in it. Their rage had been stolen, replaced with something gentler, something that made them hesitate at crucial moments. Kale himself tore through them like a golden-eyed demon, his massive wolf form cutting down anyone who stood between him and the prisoners. He was magnificent and terrifying, a king in his element, and Nova understood for the first time why the Northern Territories had prospered under his rule. She saw him corner the one-eyed rogue leader, saw the terror in the man's face as he realized he'd made a fatal mistake. Kale's wolf was twice the size of any other, his golden eyes blazing with righteous fury. The rogue tried to run, tried to flee, but there was nowhere to go. It was over in seconds. Nova turned away from the carnage, her heart hammering. She'd wanted the rogues stopped, but she hadn't wanted to watch them die. Even after everything, there was something in her that mourned the loss of life, any life. Maybe that made her weak, or maybe that was what made her a healer. Nova ran toward the makeshift prison where the pups were being held. She found them huddled together in a filthy cave, bound with rough rope, their small faces streaked with tears and dirt. The smallest one was crying in great hiccuping sobs, her tiny body shaking so hard Nova could hear her teeth chattering. "It's okay," Nova whispered, dropping to her knees beside them. Her hands worked at the ropes while her gift worked at their fear, soothing, comforting, promising safety. "You're safe now. I promise you're safe." The smallest pup, a little girl with tangled brown hair and red-rimmed eyes, crawled into her lap the moment she was free. She clung to Nova's neck like a lifeline, her small heart hammering against Nova's chest. "Are you the Moon Lady?" the child whispered. "The one Mama says watches over us." Nova's throat closed. "No, sweetheart, I'm just a healer." "You look like her." The little girl touched Nova's silver hair with wonder. "Pretty like the moon." When Kale found them, his wolf form covered in blood and his eyes still blazing with battle rage, he stopped dead at the sight. His mate, surrounded by rescued pups, holding the smallest one in her arms while the others pressed close for comfort like puppies seeking warmth. He shifted back to human form, not caring that he was naked and gore-spattered. "Nova." She looked up, and the smile that crossed her face was like sunrise breaking over mountains. "We did it," she said softly. "They're safe." Kale crossed to her in 3 strides and dropped to his knees, gathering her and the pups and all of it into his arms. He buried his face in her silver hair, breathing her in, assuring himself she was real and alive and here. "You brilliant, impossible woman," he murmured against her hair. "You wonderful, terrifying, beautiful woman. I told you I'd try my best." The little girl in Nova's arms peered up at Kale with wide, curious eyes. "Are you the Alpha King?" "Yes." "Are you going to marry the Moon Lady?" Kale looked at Nova, his golden eyes soft in a way she'd never imagined they could be. "If she'll have me." "I hardly know you," Nova said, but she was smiling. "Then let me spend the rest of my life helping you know me. Stay, be my Luna. Let me prove that not everyone will abandon you." The mate bond sang between them, warm and sure, but Nova barely noticed it. Because Kale was right, this wasn't about fate or the moon goddess or destiny. This was about choice, about trust, about the possibility of a future she'd never dared to imagine. "The rest of your life is a long time," she said carefully. "Not long enough, not for you." Nova looked at the pups still clinging to her, at the warriors who'd fought beside her, at this impossible man who'd walked into her dungeon and offered her everything. Okay, she whispered. Okay. Okay, I'll stay. I'll try. I'll let you prove it. Kale's smile was like the sun breaking through storm clouds. That's all I ask. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of change. Nova found herself swept into a world she'd never imagined, a world of politics and diplomacy, of pack alliances and territorial disputes. As the Alpha King's intended mate, she was suddenly visible in a way she'd never been before. Wolves who would have spat on her a month ago now bowed their heads in respect. It was disorienting, sometimes infuriating, but Kale was always there beside her, steady and patient. He taught her about the 12 packs, their histories and grievances and alliances. He showed her the intricacies of ruling, the balance between strength and compassion that kept the peace. And slowly, day by day, he showed her who he really was beneath the crown. She learned that he hated mushrooms but loved spicy food, that he read poetry late at night when he couldn't sleep, that he'd lost his parents to a rogue attack when he was 19 and had spent the following decade uniting the packs to prevent such tragedies from happening to others. That beneath the power and the crown, he was just a man, lonely and hopeful and desperately afraid of losing the mate he'd finally found. Nova fell in love with him piece by piece, like leaves falling from a tree. By the time the mating ceremony arrived, her choice wasn't a choice at all. It was simply the truth of who they'd become together. The ceremony took place 3 weeks after the rescue, under the full moon, with all 12 packs of the Northern Territories in attendance. Nova stood at the center of the sacred circle, her silver hair braided with moonflowers, wearing a white gown that made her look like the moon itself given human form. Kale stood across from her in the traditional black of an Alpha King, but his eyes, those impossible golden eyes, never left her face. Do you, Nova Ashworth, accept this bond freely given? The pack elder's voice rang across the clearing. Do you take Kale Ironwood as your mate, your alpha, your partner in all things? I do, Nova said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. Do you, Kale Ironwood, accept this bond freely chosen? Do you take Nova Ashworth as your mate, your Luna, your equal in all things? I do. Kale's voice was rough with emotion. From now until the moon falls from the sky. The bond blazed between them as he marked her, his teeth sinking into the juncture of her neck and shoulder. Pain and pleasure and belonging crashed through Nova in equal measure, and she felt something fundamental shift inside her, a piece clicking into place that she hadn't known was missing. She marked him back, not because tradition demanded it, but because she wanted to, because he was hers as much as she was his. The assembled wolves howled their approval, 1,000 voices rising to the stars. Somewhere in the crowd, Nova heard a little girl's voice rise above the rest. The Moon Lady found her king. Later, in the privacy of their chambers, Kale traced the new mark on Nova's neck with reverent fingers. Any regrets? Ask me in 50 years. He laughed, the sound rumbling through his chest. I intend to. Nova rolled onto her side, studying his face in the moonlight. Kale. Ahem. Thank you for giving me a choice, for letting me decide instead of demanding. You deserved that. He pulled her closer, tucking her against his body. You deserved it long before I found you. I'm just sorry it took so long. I'm not. Nova smiled against his skin. If my life had been different, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't have you. I wouldn't have found my home. This will always be your home, Kale promised, for as long as you want it. Forever, then. Forever. The years that followed were not always easy. There were challenges, rival packs who tested their borders, rogues who needed to be dealt with, political maneuvering that exhausted them both. There were losses, too. Friends who fell in battle, wolves who couldn't be saved despite Nova's gift. But through it all, they had each other. Nova learned to be a Luna, to stand beside her mate and speak for those who couldn't speak for themselves. She championed the moon-touched, fighting for their rights and their dignity, slowly changing minds that had been closed for centuries. Where once the moon-touched had been feared and shunned, now they were valued, protected, celebrated. Kale learned to be softer, to let down the walls he'd built around his heart during years of ruling alone. He learned that strength didn't mean never showing weakness, that asking for help wasn't the same as admitting defeat. His Luna taught him that, with her quiet courage and her stubborn refusal to let him carry his burdens alone. Years passed like river water, swift and sweet. The Northern Territories flourished under their rule, the Alpha King and his moon-touched Luna, whose healing gift brought prosperity and peace to packs that had known only conflict for generations. Nova established a sanctuary for moon-touched wolves, a sprawling estate at the heart of Ironwood territory where those born different could learn to use their gifts without fear. She trained healers, counseled traumatized wolves, and slowly changed the way her kind was viewed throughout the shifter world. Where once the moon-touched had been feared and shunned, now they were valued, protected, celebrated. The little girl from the rescue, her name was Lily, came to live at the sanctuary. Her pack had fallen to rogues in the attack, and she had no family left to claim her. Nova adopted her officially a year after the mating ceremony, and Kale embraced fatherhood with a ferocity that surprised everyone who knew him. He carried Lily on his shoulders through the palace gardens, taught her to track deer in the forest, held her through nightmares about the rogues who'd taken her. And when Nova finally became pregnant, not just once, but with twins, the joy that flooded through their bond was enough to light the entire Northern Territories. The pups came in spring, a boy and a girl, both born with their mother's silver hair and their father's golden eyes. The first time Kale held his son, his hands shaking with wonder and terror, Nova thought her heart might burst from the love filling it. "They're perfect," Kale whispered. "How are they so perfect?" "They're ours," Nova said simply. "How could they be anything else?" Years turned to decades. The twins grew strong and fierce and kind, their mother's healing gift manifesting in both of them alongside their father's alpha power. Lily became a renowned healer in her own right, eventually taking over the sanctuary when Nova stepped back to focus on her family. She found her own mate, a quiet beta warrior who looked at her like she'd hung the stars, and gave Nova and Kale 3 grandchildren who ran wild through the palace halls. One evening, when the twins were 8 years old, Nova found them huddled together in the palace gardens, their silver heads bent close in whispered conversation. "Mama," her daughter tugged at her sleeve, violet eyes wide with worry. "Why do we look different from the other pups? Their hair is normal colors, and ours is like snow." Nova knelt down, smoothing her daughter's silver hair. "Because the moon goddess made us special, little one. Made us different so we could help people in ways others can't." "Is being different bad?" her son asked, his golden eyes, so like his father's, filled with uncertainty. "Being different is a gift." Nova pulled both her children close. "It took me a long time to understand that, but now I know our differences are what make us powerful, what make us needed, what make us loved." "Do you love us because we're different?" "I love you because you're mine." Nova kissed both their foreheads. "And you will always, always be mine." From the doorway of the palace, Kale watched his mate and their children, his heart so full he thought it might burst. He'd been Alpha King for nearly 40 years now, had faced wars and challenges and losses that would have broken a lesser wolf. But this quiet moment of family and love and belonging, this was worth every battle, every scar, every sleepless night. Nova looked up and caught his eye, her smile soft and knowing. "Enjoying the view, Your Majesty." "Always." He crossed the garden to join his family, gathering them all into his arms. "Always and forever." Outside the palace windows, the full moon rose silver and bright, casting its blessing down upon the Alpha King, his Luna, and the pups who would one day continue their legacy. A legacy built not on power or conquest, but on choice, on trust, on love, And somewhere in the celestial realm, the moon goddess smiled upon her children, knowing that this time she'd gotten it exactly right.